great to be with all of you. Thank you for being here. I see my wonderful colleagues from the college, Jim Seeger and Gary Sandrowski, and my students are here, and people from the university. And thank you for being here. I feel legally in good shape now because we have one of our counselors here, so we're all good. So it's a pleasure. You're going to hear from one of our exemplary graduate students on one of these pieces shortly. Eric Taylor is here. And Eric is a wonderful vocalist, and he's also doing his Master of Music program in choral conducting, as well as teaching in public schools and private schools and performing in the area. So I'm very happy that you were able to be here today, and I know you're going to run to a class in a little while, and we have a few other students. I see some of my jazz and music business students are here. Thank you for being here. There are a few connections that I'd like to talk about. And I brought a keyboard, a digital piano, because it's kind of interesting to see where music starts out and then where it ends up. So the first piece I thought I'd just overview for you is a piece I wrote for my daughter, and it's called Darling Daughter Nicole. And at the time, she was 15 and a half, almost 16, and some of you have had children that age, or you have friends that age. So it ended up being an album, a CD, and it came out and it received a nice award and everything else. But it's called For Nicole, and then the piece was called Darling Daughter Nicole, and it started out this way, and then I'll show you where it ended up on a performance that, well, we recorded an album, and with my wonderful colleague, Professor Russ Miller, who played saxophone and flute and did the string arranging, did a wonderful thing. So this piece started out like this. That's an overview of the song, and it ended up sounding like this. And this involved Russ Miller in this particular piece playing saxophone and flute, and then we used string players from the area and from also this university, and then my bass player is Jeff Halsey, who's the director of jazz studies at Bowling Green, but has done quite a bit of work here at Wayne State, and David Taylor, who's a professor of jazz drums on our faculty, and just happens to have a son here, I think. That's interesting. So, give me just a second to get this going here. So that's thank you. That was Darling Daughter. And where it started out inspirationally, it was I had this beautiful daughter who was a wonderful soul. She's kind and she's loving and she's gentle and she's talented. And in the meantime, she's going through 15 and a half, almost 16, and I see the nods of the heads like, yeah, I know. Yeah, it's a tough time for, and she's doing everything right, but the music follows kind of what was happening with her because it changes tonal centers because she's trying to find her way, and even at the end it has a little bit of a suspense, and then it finally calms down a little bit, and she's doing fine. I mean, she's started college this fall and theater major. She's at our friendly school down the street at Michigan State and having a great time. So that piece kind of evolved. We took this album project, Russ Miller and when we went to South Africa, and that's going to relate to some of the music that you're going to hear in a minute too, because we used the first chair players of the Durban Philharmonic, and we used jazz musicians that are colleagues of mine over there playing and represented the university, and it was very, very positive experience. And that's going to lead to a story in a few minutes, but I want to play another piece from that album just so you know where the variety of things go. One of the last times I was here with Professor Edwards and his fine staff, which I thank all the time because they're wonderful, I did one of the sessions a couple times ago was on the brain and music and martial arts. And in my other private life, I'm a black belt in martial arts, and I studied that for years. And we actually had a few people that got up and demonstrated some things, and then we did some musical things and some psychological things to show where the brain was at. I think that's where we met before, sir. And so I wrote a piece for my guru, is Brad Rabe, and he's a phenomenal martial artist, and it was called Black Belt High. So this opened this new album, and if I can get it up here, it actually won a Global Music Award internationally. So I can get it up. Yeah, here we go. I'm not going to play everything because now I'm going to just play some excerpts so you can see what the story is. That's the opening theme of it, and the idea behind it compositionally was that in boxing or in martial arts or in various forms of involvement in be it Filipino martial arts or Wing Chun, whatever it might be, or Muay Thai, there's a back and forth, there's a sparring, and it's very similar to what happens in jazz. Jazz is improvisation, jazz is democracy, jazz is communication, jazz is team building, jazz is collaboration. I have all these wonderful music business and jazz majors here. Jessica's music business, and Steve, Nick, and then Adam is a saxophonist and from the Jazz Tech. And it's collaborating, and we talk about entrepreneurship and innovation, and we talk about team building. I think we were doing that about 45 minutes ago in class, weren't we? So this idea of back and forth and different textures and different opponents and different ways of coming together that's where this piece really came from, and it was to honor my colleague, of course, but it also, in the middle of the piece, there's a dialogue that goes back and forth between the bass player and the drummer. And literally the idea behind it, when Russ Miller and I talked about developing this to another and producing it, was a sparring back and forth between the bass player and the drummer. And it goes on for quite a while, and it's improvisational. And it became part of the music that we also took to South Africa. And I thought you might find that interesting. And it evolves. All of these pieces have improvisation in them too, which I feel is important to our art form and what we all do individually. Any questions so far? We okay? Am I going too fast, too slow? So then there was this piece of music that I'm going to do sooner rather than later, because I know Jessica has to run to a class, and I'm sure she wants to hear Eric. But from South Africa, there was this trip, the 10th trip that took place in September of 2013. And we played and we performed. Professor Miller was with me, and we worked with the South African students. This is part of a long-term relationship with Wayne State, where we've gone and helped with our music relief. We've also brought supplies there and instruments and textbooks internationally, and as well as from this country, as well as from this university. So on the way back, and here's the story which will set the tone for the text, which will set the reason for the composition that you're going to hear, which is called The Lion's Bridge. It is not on this album because it's brand new, and Eric and I just recorded it late summer, right?
Late summer, September.
September, because the 1-year anniversary of the people involved was literally September 17th. On the plane coming back from, we had to go from Durban, South Africa, where University of Natal is. We flew to Johannesburg, Joburg. And then that's about an 1.5-hour flight. And then Joburg to Atlanta is roughly 15 hours. And then Atlanta to Detroit. And there are layovers and things like that. But the whole trip usually takes about 23 hours to 26 hours, depending on the situation. So we got on the plane, and I know a couple of you know this story, so I apologize if you've heard it before. But the bottom line is, we got on the plane, and there was an elderly man, and this is in the cabin that I'm in. And you know the coach, you're all sitting together, and it's about half the size of this, right? And there was an elderly man who was having health problems with his family, and he was part of a pastoral group that had just come to Johannesburg, apparently, to do some work and to take some seminars or whatever. And a crew of EMTs came on board, and they were checking them out, and apparently Delta at that time, which was involved with their international franchise, were very concerned that that person maybe shouldn't make that flight. And we had to wait about 1.5 hours while they checked everything out, and they eventually decided to let the person stay on, and he and his family, like 30 other people on this plane who were in different parts of the compartment, not in the very coach compartment I was in, but he was like right across. Actually, he was right across this way. So we got 3 hours over the ocean from Johannesburg going towards Atlanta, and all of a sudden the captain called out that there was a medical emergency. Do we have any nurses, doctors, medical personnel? And you know, it was a blessing that on this plane that maybe had 320 people or 350 people, there were actually 7 medical professionals on board. There were 4 doctors, 3 nurses, and out of the doctors, there was an emergency room physician who, this lady was like in charge of an emergency room. And they were all US based, as it turned out. There was a neurosurgeon, there was a brain surgeon, there was a cancer surgeon, and then there were 3 nurses. Incredible. Plus the flight crew that was there. And everybody was working and trying to help. And after almost 2 hours, they lost him. They didn't lose him, he lost. I mean, he went on to his next journey, as the case may be. So by international law, they had to go back at that point, because the closest point was Joburg. We had to fly back to Johannesburg. So now we're several hours out in the ocean. This has happened, and now we're flying several hours back to Joburg, to Johannesburg, because then the police and the mortuary people have to come on and do what they do. And they did that, and the gentleman sitting right next to me, to my right, was a gentleman named John Gilbert. and he was a pastor, a new pastor, about to open up a new congregation. And he had been over there, and the whole time he was literally praying for the family and the people, because it was pretty chaotic, if you can imagine. You know, because when you fly back, they still have, you know, the gentleman has passed, so they have to take care of all that. And so we went back to Joburg. We waited a couple more hours where the medical and police did what they had to do. And then surprisingly, the captain said, we're going to try this, we're going to try going back to Atlanta. So everybody had already been like 6 or 7 hours already, and we're going to start over again. So that's kind of amazed me. I was actually, wow, that's amazing, you know. The gentleman next to me was doing okay, you know, he was resting, but he was still doing a lot of praying. He was 53 years old. So we flew over again. You know, many of us were trying to console the people that were involved because family was there and everything. It's right in the cabin that we're in. And to cut it a little shorter, we got about an hour outside of Atlanta. We've been flying about 14 hours. And they usually start to have the little breakfast and some of those things. So the gentleman I talked to, John Gilbert, had been sleeping a little bit, then he was praying a little bit more for these people, and I looked and I said, how are you doing? He said, good, everything's okay. And I got up and I went to the restroom for a minute, and all of a sudden I heard over the speakers, we have another medical emergency, we need all the doctors and nurses immediately, you know, and I looked across, and he was on the floor and going through what was apparently a heart attack. And I ran over to him, and they said, does anybody know? And I said, he was sitting next to me, a nice gentleman. I said, well, you got to go through all of his stuff and find out if he, you know, get his phone or see if he's got any medical emergencies. We got to try to get a hold of his family. So we were rushing through and grabbing all of his luggage out of the bins on top and going through this. And he had Bibles and he had DVDs from his pastoral workshops and everything. And then there was his phone. And I was trying to get on his phone, and 2 other gentlemen were helping me. And I finally found some numbers, but I couldn't get a connection because of the cell phone stuff. They said, run it up to the captain. So I ran up to the front of the plane. I was trying to get up there, and finally a purser came and they said, we just lost him. You know, and we were trying to make the phone calls to find out if he had what the medical emergency was, if he had a pre-existing condition. So we went forward to Atlanta, which was an hour away. Now, this is part of the story of writing music, by the way, and also finding the therapy in music, and finding the consolation in music, and finding the communication artistically to deal with things that are very profound. So I still had these numbers in my phone, and we pulled into Atlanta. Of course, we had to wait for the police, and same story again, and all of the officials, and they started to take John Gilbert off, you know, the police and the mortuary people, and they said, get his luggage and everything else, and we took his luggage and we put it with the police, and they were taking this off, and I was looking around, and up in this bin there was a bag. It was like a bag you'd get in a Saks Fifth Avenue or wherever, some kind of a grocery store, anything. And I pulled this down. Inside of it there was a stuffed lion about this big. And I looked at the people in this compartment again that were all next to me. Everybody was in chaos, of course. And I said, does anybody own this? Does this belong to anybody? And it was like this lion. And it was this beautiful little stuffed lion. And nobody, there, you know, everybody was like, no, you know. And I said, it has to be his. Maybe it was for his wife or for his daughter or his son or somebody. So I ran it out to the police. I said, make sure this goes with his luggage. This has to go. It has to be his. So they did. In the meantime, we came back into Atlanta. Eventually, we flew to Detroit. Now, Professor Miller was in the back part, and you know, he was in the section behind me and Coach as well, but we weren't in the same compartment, but he knew something was going on too. All those people, everybody was kind of traumatized. I had these phone numbers, and I kept trying to call him for 3 days. They were apparently numbers of his on his cell phone. I kept trying, and finally, 4 days after I got back, a lady answered the phone, and I politely said, is this the home of John Gilbert or the family of John Gilbert? And she said, yes, I'm his wife. And I explained that I was on the plane and sitting next to him, and she, she said, oh, please tell me what happened to my husband. We don't know anything, just that he died. You know, so I explained that he was helping everybody and praying for them, and that she was a pastor too, as it turned out, and an adjunct college professor. And the bottom line is, they didn't know what happened to him, and I asked if his luggage came, and I asked if this lion came, and she said, "Oh yes, that was for me. That was a gift for me." You know, and I said, "I understand." So they had a memorial service about a week later, and I asked for information. I drove down to Ohio, and it was outside of Toledo. And when I got there, it was a group of pastors. And she said, "Will you please tell people what happened?" Because nobody really knew, and we did. It was a little, you know, I tried to help. Anyway, I came back from all of that, and I spoke to my friend Brian Wagner, who was a martial artist, and we were having a cup of coffee, and I just happened to tell him this story as to what happened. And I didn't hear anything. You know, we didn't say anything about it. And then he said, "I wouldn't be surprised someday if that becomes a part of a suite or something." And that was kind of an interesting comment. So December, in the middle of December, late December, I get this email from him, and he sends me this poem. And he said, "Do you mind if I use this as a retreat seminar that I'm giving up in Traverse City for some people on meditation and martial arts?" I said, "Of course you can use it, you know." And he sent me this, and I looked at it and I said, "Wow, he captured the whole story," which is now leading to Eric Taylor here. So I started to try to write this in February. I tried to deal with this compositionally, and we were a little busy doing some other things, my colleague and I, and we were, and our students, we were all doing our classes and everything, and it wasn't something that happened. And finally, you know, I said to my colleague, I said, "You know, I need to take a few days sometime to go write some music," and I was graciously given 12 days to go write some music in May. This was Alps trip where I used to live up in the Alps, which you'll hear about. And I wrote a lot of music and did a lot of performing in Europe. But now I want you to envision, I want you to use your creative energies for a minute to envision like the top of these Alps. And I go like as high as you can go, and I have some friends up there, and they, you know, get a piano and they bring it up there, and then I go hide out and I just write for 10 or 12 hours a day, and then I, you know, have some food, and then the next morning I get up at 5 o'clock and I run up and I do my martial arts and go running, and then I run up the mountain, and I come back down and I have a yogurt and some juice, and then I write all day again, and then, you know, and then at night I have a little food and a cognac sometimes, or a glass of wine, you know, with friends. And they usually say, "What did you write today?" And then I'll play some music of what I wrote that day or whatever. So the bottom line is, I get to Switzerland in May, and it was 12 days, I think it was between the 5th and the 17th. And I wrote enough music for like an album. And the last tune that I wrote on this was The Lion's Bridge. And it came out. The music happened. And my thought was to give it as a memorial gift to the family, because it will be 1 year on September 17th that he died on the plane. So I'm going to play that for you now with Eric, okay? And the idea was, if this was musically and artistically appropriate, we'd record it, which we did in our Wayne State studio, and we did it in front of the Wayne State recording class, because they came in and we talked to them about what we were doing, you know, and Tom Court and Gary Sadrowski and others have all been involved in that studio. Some of you worked in this studio. It's a great studio. And the students came in and we talked about what we were going to do. You want to tell them what we did?
We went into the recording studio. We did a couple takes of the Lion's Bridge, and Professor Tini talked about the story about what happened and what inspired him to write this piece. And we did a couple takes, and it turned into this really beautiful work to be able to present as a gift.
So I was going to do this last, but I'm going to do it first, because I think that will follow accordingly. And Eric, is a marvelous musician. I've given you a little background on what he's doing there at Wayne State. And probably won just about every award in the music department, academically and musically, but you were also a resident advisor, right?
Yep, over here at the Towers Residential Suites.
What else are you doing now?
Well, I am currently the middle school choir director at Notre Dame Preparatory and Marist Academy in Pontiac. I also am a musician at Our Lady of Hope Parish in St. Clair Shores, and I'm also doing my Master of Music degree in choral conducting here at Wayne State University.
Okay, so this text starts out, "The lion did not belong, I know. I asked, but it did from a distance." Now the idea I was thinking of compositionally was that this lion became the transition from death to life. In other words, this John Gilbert had passed on to his next, and in fact, it was for his wife, and it was a transition, and that energy went to her. So this is where the text came from that Brian Wagner did. But it did from a distance. A bridge from departed to breathing. Actually, two leavings, in other words, two people passed. One bridge and new beginning for the lion. So the lion had a new beginning with the wife of John Gilbert, who was also a pastor. They were going to open up a new congregation together. That was pretty interesting to me. And then the middle section goes into a minor mode, and it says, "I knew him new," like this new man, time and singularities and flight, and the lion had imploded us together. Time and singularities and the flight and the lion, meaning the lion up there, had imploded us together. Next section talks about when I left him for a minute. Time had worn me down, I left to walk, and so did the connection. The connection meaning him, he passed. Gone now, gone now. Next section goes on and it says, a patient lion stayed behind. That's the lion up there in the cargo area. I think totem. A totem in Indian philosophy is that it's a connection. A totem is a connection between energies or different areas or philosophies or religious involvements. A vehicle to transport what is true back home. Something was there, so I sent the lion on. The two of them, John Gilbert and the lion together. They literally put the lion on top of him when they rolled him out of the plane. Lion and essence to reconnect. The essence meaning his energies moving to his family. A part of me went too. Now I'm getting personal. And to fill the whole, awareness of the terminal velocity. In other words, that this energy would continue forward. And this gentleman sang this, and I believe captured, re-recorded it.
The lion did not belong, I know, I asked, but it did from a distance. A bridge from departed to breathing. Actually two leavings, one bridge and new beginning for the lion. I knew him new, this new man, time and singularities and flight, and the lion had imploded us together. Time had worn me down. I left to walk, and so did the connection. I think totem a vehicle to transport what is true back home. Something was there, so I set the lion on the two of them. Lion and essence to reconnect. A part of me went to and to fill the whole. Awareness of the terminal velocity.
Oh. Eric, do you want to tell them anything from your perspective as a vocalist and as a performer regarding the piece?
When Professor Tini came up to me to talk about the piece, I had looked at it and I saw it for the first time and was like, wow, this is really, I'm loving the feel of the piece, and but I didn't know the story until Professor Tini and I talked about it, and it took it to another level as far as my understanding of how it went. Just knowing the backstory and knowing about what had happened, and the energy of that all, it's one of my. I've done a lot of compositions. Like we have an amazing annual composition day at Wayne State University, and I've done a lot of like new compositions for voice, and this is one of the most beautiful pieces that I've worked on. Anyway, it's a beautiful work. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a nice hand for Eric, too. So, interestingly, when I left to go to Switzerland to do this quick compositional research trip, I had loaded up the car to drive to the airport, and for some reason I ran back to my desk and I grabbed that text of the Lions Bridge, because it was not with my materials, and it was the last thing I took. And as it turned out, it was the last thing I wrote up in the Alps, because I finished it the morning that I had to leave on the flight to go back, and it was still wet on the page, if you know what I mean. And I finished it, and I put it in my bag, and I came back home, and then we, a few months later, a couple months later, we did it. Any questions about that? Does that make some sense to you? I know it's a long story, but it is a true story, and it is what happens in the inspirational or the compositional process. Where is it going to go from here? Well, we sent it as a gift, a CD that we made to the family, and we made multiple copies and sent them to them. Do I see it having some additional legs down the road? Yeah, I do. I mean, could it end up being something with a chamber orchestra and a soloist? Possibly. Will it be done soon? Performed? Yeah. I did it with my jazz quartet at the Michigan Jazz Festival last July, and it was fresh. And then on January 30th, some of this music that you're going to hear in a minute is going to be performed right here at Wayne State in the concerts and lecture series we have in Shaver Music Recital Hall in Old Main. Do you know where that is? And my colleague Russ Miller, who plays flute and sax, and I are going to play this as a duo, all of this new music from Switzerland, because there's 7 other pieces. And then I'm going to ask Eric to come up and sing this piece, and we're going to improvise and do that spontaneously, because it's going to have another life, because there'll be 3 of us doing it together. and we'll collaborate and we'll innovate together, right? We'll improvise. Is that fair?
It'll be awesome.
All right, so that's where that piece is going. Now, in the meantime, on this trip, there were several pieces that came up, and I'm just going to play a little bit so you kind of get an idea where things go. A lot of the music that I write has a jazz emphasis, or it has world issues and things like that. This piece was the first piece I wrote when I got over there, and it was called, it was actually something I'd been working on at home, but with my teaching and dean responsibilities, I have, there's no time, I think somebody asked me, was it Cedric, did you ask me when I practiced today, this morning in class? You said, when I practice, and I said, well, my day starts out at 5:30 in the morning, and I work out every morning, and 7 days a week doing martial arts and training. And then I teach, and I do administrative stuff, and I have a family, and then I usually find myself practicing at 12 or 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning for a few hours. That's when I do that, and regularly, because you have to. But on a real piano, I have a Steinway grand, so it's a little different than the toys that we have to bring with us sometimes. So this piece was called Looking Up. I had started it in March, didn't come together. As soon as I got in the Alps, where I've written a lot of music and then some CDs from up there, and it's like my inspirational place. I get up there, I can look across the top of the Alps, I can see way down at Lake Lemon, see the way down at the bottom of the lake. I can run up the mountain, come down the mountain. The people I know up there are like a little village. They consider me a member of their family and everything. I have nieces and nephews up there by friends, if you know what I mean. So this piece started out like this, and it could be a Latin thing, or it could be a jazz straight ahead tune or whatever, but it's called Looking Up, and it's like movement 1 of 8 within the Swiss Alps suite, which is like pretty new. Well, we'll see where it goes in January 30th with Russ Miller. We're just going to take it wherever it goes. Will it evolve into something bigger, like with a larger group or a chamber orchestra? I'm not sure. So that was like the first piece. Then the second piece that came up, and to help you maybe understand, and I'm sure you all do this in your own ways, it was like going up there gave me the release valve for creativity. I wrote a whole album in 12 days. Now, I wrote 10 and 12 hours a day, but the interesting thing about it is it just kept coming out. And back some years ago, I guess it was in, this one is 2004, it's called The Eyes of Youth, Les Yeux de la Jeunesse, because I do a lot of tunes in French and in English. The you'll see the Alps up there, and I'm at the top of those Alps is what's going on. And the whole album, I wrote that album literally staying up there again, and my little nieces and nephews and the kids in the neighborhood would come up, and there's a little fire going on and everything else, and I'd be watching them around the fire, and boy, that energy, you know, it was all good energy, very positive friends, a lot of love going on and everything, and I'd get up in the middle of the night and I'd hear this this melody, you know, and I'd say, wow, Eyes of Youth, and I wrote the lyrics on some of these too, which was kind of interesting. So I'm gonna play that for you because it's kind of interesting how things happen here. So these kids are sitting around called The Eyes of Youth. My wife April is singing, Chris Collins is playing saxophone, and Jeff Baldwin.
You are everything that I feel in life.
Actually, my brother Ray is playing bass.
That you could know the promise in your eyes I see. You feel life each day like a child at play who knows nothing of life's woes. The glow within your heart, it shows. You know life is a time for love and smiles and play as you go through each day by day. Love sends its gift with you to show the way. Now the eyes of youth look ahead with joy to the wonders of each day, and say to all who know, hello, come with me.
So what happened there is we did it in English. Yeah, Ray Tini was playing bass. My brother used to be with Sinatra and Anka and all those people. And Chris Collins is featured on this piece, playing saxophone, of course. And Chris and I did an album when we were in South Africa. I took him over there with me back in 1999, and we came back and we did a whole album of music together, and then we did some albums of his music together. And then a few years after this one, in the Global Peace and Understanding album, which is about different things that were going on, from tsunami to AIDS and to the Lake George disaster. And I know we're out of time here, but I was going to play some other music that I wrote about these various things that were happening globally. And it's called Global Peace and Understanding. I did a French version with some French singers over there, which is totally different. And an Italian-French accordionist, Peter Suavi, and we did it with piano and accordion, and two French singers singing in French, of course, this same piece with it, and it sounds like it's a little Baroque chamber piece. You know, it's totally different. And I was gonna play that for you, but maybe as you're walking out, I'll let you play. But then there's a lot of other pieces that are of different styles and characters. Some of them, there's a classical suite, you know, there's another suite called the Baroque suite that literally is with strings, and it's right out of Bach, and I was thinking of Bach, you know, so I wrote that and then added some jazz in the middle of it. So I know I'm out of time. Any questions? Any thoughts?
Play, maestro, play.
Do you want CD or do you want live music? I don't know what you want.
Live music is better.
Oh, you always like it. Yeah. Dr. Edwards, my dear friend, you know, we met in the American Airlines parking lot. You know, when he came to this country we were graced to have him at Wayne State University. I was coming back from one of my trips in South Africa, and we're on the same little, you know, shuttle going over to the parking lot, and I see this wonderful gentleman there, and I see these four Japanese gentlemen there that I kind of recognize are the musicians. You know. So I turned to him and I said, "Excuse me, sir, are you coming to Detroit? Well, it was nice to have you." He goes, "Yes, I'm a new colleague. I'm a new professor at Wayne State University. Why do you ask?" And I said, "You know, things are supposed to happen, right?" And I said, "Well, I'm a professor at Wayne State University, colleague. Nice to have you here." You know, and we bonded with this relationship. And then I looked across the little, you know, the little airlines parking shuttle that you're in. You know, 10 people in it. There's 4 Japanese gentlemen. I said, "It's nice to see you here." And they said, yes, we're here to play a concert. I said, "Yes, I think you're the Tokyo String Quartet, right?" And they said, "Yes, how did you know?" And I said, "Well, I'm on the board of the Chamber Music Society of Detroit, and we brought you in, and you're playing for us, 2 nights from now." And they said, "Yes, we are playing for you," so we're all on the same little shuttle. And I don't know, these things happen when life does what it does, and you travel internationally and different things. And it's been a friendship forever. How many years have you been here now?
God, please.
Oh, here's the one saving grace. I've been here longer. Just when you thought, Well, so you heard that piece. Then there were some other pieces that were, I wrote a piece from my mother, who died a year ago today, January 15th. It's called Cycles of Life. And it's actually, I was thinking about Pat Metheny harmonies, and Pat Metheny, who's one of my, wonderful guitarist and brilliant player, and it's turned out to be like a real kind of, quasi up-tempo jazz rock kind of thing, because she was very positive. She died at 96 and a half. You can believe that. I couldn't say 96, she'd say and a half. Then there's a piece called like In Stillness, where I was looking out at the top of the Alps. And it was, excuse the toy piano here, but it's all I can do here. It's called In Stillness. On, but that's the essence of it. And it was really looking at across the top of the Alps, and it was just the clouds, the cumulus clouds, the big flight, white puffy ones were just floating by, and you could see the tips of the Alps. And then there was another one that was called The Rainy Days in the Alps, because there you go again, that's a color piece, and it's going to be expanded into, I'm thinking right now, writing more like a chamber orchestra piece on it. And then there was, I'll play one little short other piece for you, the new music. There's a lot of other things on the album that I can talk about, like I had a Siamese cat that was called Little Chi, and I wrote a really fast samba that Chris Collins and I played duo, and it was like really frenetic, and then there were some other pieces. My South African drummer, Lulu Gapzano, died of AIDS. And he was always there when I needed him to help do clinics and workshops and performances. He was like a Lewis Hayes jazz drummer. He was a great, great player, best drummer in South Africa. We played together for 20 years, and he died from being in a hospital and being infected from something that it wasn't. He didn't have AIDS, but he got it from something else, a transfusion or something. And he went quickly. And I heard about it in New York when I was there, and so I wrote a piece called Lament for Lulu, And it's very bombastic, and it's very tumultuous, and it's a totally different kind of piece. And then there's, I'll end with something real positive. This is called Sunny Days in the Alps. Have any of you seen the movie Ted?
The bear?
Ted,
The bear.
the bear.
Yes.
It just had to be, yeah. Well, the writer of that is a very well-known and very prolific film writer. His name is Walter Murphy. And if you've watched like Family Guy or American Dad or all sorts, and a number of other shows, by the way, that are like drama shows and documentaries, you'll see this name Walter Murphy. And I've been following this guy for a while. But only because I do film music stuff, you know, in LA and stuff. And anyway, this movie comes out called Ted, which is kind of a just joke comedy thing, and Mark Wahlberg and some other people are in it, Mila Kunis and so. It's just a funny movie, whatever. But I'm listening to the opening thing. There's this big band playing that is fantastic, jazz big band, you know. And from my days in playing in the big bands and with some pretty, you know, great people, I said, wow, this is a poppin' band. It could be like Gordon Goodwin's band, and I was just with him in LA last week, or it could be, you know, some of the top players in LA or in New York, like a studio band. And in fact, it was an LA studio band. And the drummer was a friend of mine, Peter Erskine, who's a great drummer, and he plays on everything. And I just saw Peter the other day in California, and Peter is on all of these tracks. He plays all of the movies and the TV shows. So anyway, I saw this thing, and I'm up there in the Alps, and I'm thinking about this, and I'm going, wow, okay. In a different way, I'm going to write a piece. This is a happy piece. It was about the third piece in, and it ended up being something like this. Well, you're quite a considerate group. You know, you could have left a long time ago. You really could. Boy. So kind. Anyway, so this is called Sunny Days in the Alps, and it's kind of in the middle of this suite that goes on and on. It's like... fun piece. And the idea behind it is that we're going to just improvise on it and play on it. And we did it at the Michigan Jazz Festival, and it was fun. And then did it on a recent Mitch album show for a fundraiser they were doing to help the community, Save Detroit, and you know, see where it goes. Any questions? Any thoughts? So the music's all over the place. It could be, you know, Baroque or classical, or it could be jazz, or it could be world music, or it could be, but it comes from people, it comes from relationships, it comes from experiences, and thankfully music becomes, for me, an outlet to share and communicate with other people, and wonderful people like all of you. So thank you for having us, thank you for performing. Thank you for standing over. Standing over.
I'm so sorry that many more students didn't come and hear from this absolutely wonderful composer the creative process. I expected that I would have to charge admission. I expected that, so, but maybe the weather prevented them. But you have witnessed something important, and you should remember this moment.
Yeah. And I hope you all have a little CD gift. That's a little thank you for being here. And if you didn't get one, come up and I have a
Yes,
couple.
you can also put it.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Edwards.